I've heard people say that they're afraid to travel to some places abroad that they perceive are unsafe, but are they really? In this video, we will compare the violent crime rates of 5 cities in the US with similarly sized cities abroad to see where is the actual place that is statistically less safe to be. For the purposes of this video, we will only be looking at large cities, as it was difficult for me to find statistics from any smaller to medium-sized cities in other places. Number 5. New York City, New York. The total number of crimes reported in New York City in 2020 was about 95,000. This included about 462 murders, 1,400 rapes, as well as more than 20,000 felony assaults and 269 hate crimes. The metro population of New York is about 18.4 million. So if we compare New York's crime rate to 3 other cities with a similar population, we will look at Osaka, Japan, Dhaka, Bangladesh, and Mumbai, India. Osaka, Japan, 19.3 million. Now, according to several sources, Osaka actually has had the highest crime rate of any city in Japan for quite a number of years. The Yakuza have a larger presence here than most other Japanese cities, and there is a sizable homeless population compared to other cities in Japan. Despite all these seeming warning signs, in comparison, there is really very little danger here. 79 murders compared to New York's 462, 109 reported rapes compared to New York's 1,428. So yeah, no comparison here. But to take this a level deeper, in 2012, MSNBC ranked Plano, Texas as the safest city in the US. Per capita, Plano has 2 murders and 20 rapes per 100,000 people, whereas Osaka, notoriously Japan's most dangerous city, has 0.8 murders and 0.1 rapes per 100,000 people. So basically, the most dangerous city in Japan is safer than the safest city in the US. The next comparison is to Dhaka, Bangladesh, which has a population of 19.6 million. According to many sources, Dhaka is considered the most densely populated city in the world. In addition to that, Dhaka is also rife with poverty. That would seem to be a combination that would make for high levels of crime. But does it in actuality? The total number of reported crimes is quite a bit less than New York, 95,500 in New York to 17,500 here in Dhaka. But the murder rate is closer, 462 in New York to 351 in Dhaka. The US Embassy Travel Advisory says that there is a high level of petty crime, things like pickpocketing, but that violent crime, especially against foreign visitors, is extremely rare. So basically, in Dhaka, you're likely safer walking around than you are in New York City. Next is Mumbai, India, with a population of about 20 million. Now, summarizing Mumbai, I would basically say that you are quite unlikely to lose your life to a violent crime here. And if you're a man, you're significantly safer here than in New York City. However, if you are a woman, it may be a different story. Murder here is extremely rare, close to Osaka, Japan level actually. However, rape and sexual assault against women are major problems. Mumbai's 7.1 rapes per 100,000 people is extremely high when compared to most places around the world, which, if I'm doing my math correct, means about 1,400 in this 20 million population city. Oh, but wait. Based on the same math, New York is closer to 7.7 rapes per 100,000 people, which is even worse. Oh man, so Mumbai is famous for this, but New York is way worse than Mumbai, even for sexual harassment and rape. And New York is much less than most other major US cities too. So maybe India's unsafe reputation is blown a little out of proportion here. Number 4, Los Angeles, California. So Los Angeles is a slightly different scenario than New York. Its population is 12.5 million, so it's much smaller, but it actually has more total reported crime than New York, with 127,000 total. About 1/5 of that is violent in nature, meaning about 30,000. The number of murders in Los Angeles is actually quite a bit less than New York's. Los Angeles had 258 murders in 2020, whereas New York had 462. But there does seem to be a significantly larger amount of rapes here than in New York, 2,300 in Los Angeles compared to 900 in New York City, which is a major problem and way worse than just about anywhere in India or anywhere else around the world. Now let's look at 3 cities with similar populations to Los Angeles and their crime rates. Again, based on the Los Angeles metro area, where Los Angeles has a population of 12.5 million. First, let's look at Guangzhou, China, with a population of 12.6 million. Now, it's tough to know what the actual crime numbers are here, but it's pretty clear that the rates of violent crime is very low. Walking through the middle of downtown in the middle of the night, and you'll almost for sure be just fine. That being said, there really is no reliable data to pull from to know the actual reality. The US Embassy in Guangzhou says there is a very low threat risk for any sort of violent crime, though petty crimes like pickpocketing or scamming are not uncommon. But again, without any reliable statistics, comparison is really not possible, though it's easy to say that Guangzhou is a much safer city to live in than Los Angeles for the average person. Next is Moscow, Russia, 12.4 million people. The total number of reported crimes in Moscow was actually higher than LA by about 20,000, 145,000 compared to 127,000. But Moscow's crime rate used to be quite a lot higher and has been going down pretty significantly in recent years. Just to compare, through the first half of the 1990s, there were usually between 100,000 and 150,000 cars stolen in Moscow every year. Now, that is the approximate number of total crimes of any kind every year in Moscow. So, big difference. Interestingly, as the crime has been going down statistically, so has Russia's overall amount of alcohol consumption. And it seems likely there is a correlation there. In the 1980s, it was estimated that 2/3 of all violent crimes were committed by drunk people. In 1995, 3/4 of those arrested for homicide were drunk. The homicide rate in the 1980s and 90s in Moscow was among the highest in the world, but with the significant progress in recent decades, Moscow's numbers now hover much closer to Los Angeles levels, perhaps a little bit higher than, but very close. Lagos, Nigeria, 13.4 million. Now, getting reliable statistics from Lagos is challenging. Security experts say a lack of trust in local police means many crimes don't go reported, and the United Nations reports that the data that is tracked does not seem to be particularly reliable. But based on the data that is available, there are some educated estimates that can be determined. Lagos's reported homicide rate is about 2 per 100,000 people, which is relatively low, quite a bit lower than New York and a little bit lower than LA. According to the US Embassy in Lagos, there is a risk for crimes involving property theft and robbery, especially during times leading up to the holiday season. I had trouble finding specific statistics, but it does seem like armed robbery, property theft, and these kinds of things are more likely to happen in Lagos than in LA, but things like murder probably are happening at a pretty similar, maybe slightly less rate. Number 3, Chicago, Illinois. Chicago's 490 murders in 2019 is even higher than New York City, despite having a significantly lower total population. Despite that high number, it actually has a year-to-year decrease, dropping 35% since 2016's 756 reported murders. In fact, in 2016, Chicago had more murders than both New York and Los Angeles combined. The highest the murder rate has ever reached in Chicago was in 1992, when there were 34 murders per 100,000 citizens, making it one of the most murdery places in the world at the time. And despite the fact that has decreased to less than half of that now, it is still a pretty damn murdery place, statistically speaking. In fact, since 2001, Chicago has experienced a total of 7,916 murders, meaning more Americans have been murdered in Chicago since 2001 than the total number of Americans that have been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq combined during that same time period. Statistically, that means your life is less at risk to be a soldier in an actual war than it is to be a resident in Chicago. That is insane. So let's look at 3 cities with a similar population to Chicago and their crime rates. So the population of the Chicago metro area is about 8.9 million. First, let's look at London with about 9 million. Whereas Chicago's crime rate has been for the most part steadily decreasing year to year, London's has been increasing pretty significantly year to year since about 2013. Despite this, London still remains significantly statistically safer than Chicago, and it's not even close. London recorded 145 murders in 2019, which is more than 3 times less than Chicago's 490. Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, 8.1 million people. While I had difficulty finding exact statistics related to crime here, there are some pretty easy to make generalizations. Ho Chi Minh City has an extremely low crime rate, especially when it comes to any form of violent crime. Petty crimes like pickpocketing, theft, and various forms of scams are relatively common, but not anything violent. In fact, Vietnam has some of the lowest crime rates among any Southeast Asian nations. Foreigners in particular are very safe here because the punishment for criminals that are involved in crimes that target foreigners is particularly strict. While not as safe as some place like Japan, Ho Chi Minh City is a walk in the park compared to similarly sized Chicago and many other much smaller cities in the US. Tehran, Iran, 8.9 million. While your safety in Tehran might be significantly different depending on your lifestyle and where you are from, let's look at the overall statistics. It is difficult to find too many Tehran-specific statistics, but there are some more nationwide statistics that we can consider to help us understand. The overall crime rate in Iran isn't too much different than that of the average in the US, although when considering Chicago, which has among the highest crime rates in the US, it's hard to make a direct comparison. However, the most common crimes are of the non-violent variety in Iran. Drug trafficking, actually 40% of Iran's crime is drug-related, money laundering, tax evasion, and smuggling seem to be among the most common crimes. Violent crimes are not non-existent and are likely quite a bit higher than a place like Ho Chi Minh City, but they come nowhere near the levels of Chicago, and likely much less than even London. Number 2, Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore's 348 homicides in 2019, which is more than LA, but less than Chicago or New York. However, as Baltimore is a much smaller city overall than any of those places, the murder rate per 100,000 residents was at 58 murders per year per 100,000 residents, which is significantly worse than even Chicago and 10 times the US national average. On top of that, Baltimore had one of the worst murder-to-arrest rates of any place in the US, with less than 1/3 of those homicides ever leading to an actual trial. The total violent crime rate in Baltimore is about 2,000 per 100,000 residents, which is a rate that makes New York City feel like Japan in comparison. The population of the city center of Baltimore is about 575,000. So let's take a look at 3 cities with similar populations and their crime rates. Geneva, Switzerland, population of 620,000. Now, this actually would be a laughable comparison if it wasn't honestly just so tragic. Actually, the entire country of Switzerland doesn't even have 50 murders per year, so comparing just Geneva to Baltimore, the comparison is a fraction. I'd even give Japan as a run for its money as possibly the safest country in the world. Kingston, Jamaica, 592,000. Kingston, however, is a different scenario than Geneva. Jamaica is considered among the most violent places in the Caribbean, and in fact, in 2020, it had the highest homicide rate of any nation in Latin America and the Caribbean at 46.5 homicides per 100,000 residents. Whew, sounds dangerous. But wait, that's still a lower homicide rate than Baltimore. Belfast, Northern Ireland, 634,000. Now, Belfast is famous in recent histories for its violence and tension, so let's see how it compares to Baltimore. It's a little hard to find just the Belfast statistics, but since it is 1/3 of the population of Northern Ireland, we can go from those statistics to get an idea. And hey, maybe since that kind of raises the area population times 3, maybe this finally gives Baltimore a chance, right? Wrong. Northern Ireland, a place famous in recent history for its violence, had 21 total murders in 2019, which actually was still the 3rd highest rate of the decade. Wow. All right, so that's like a month in the life of Baltimore. Let's try something else here. So the first 2 cities we looked at are the 2 largest in the US, New York and Los Angeles. And the next 2 cities we looked at, Chicago and Baltimore, are both pretty famous for their high levels of violent crime. So for this last city, and to help the US in this video not look quite so insanely murderousy, let's look at a large city in the US that is statistically among the safest of all large cities in the country when considering metro areas with at least 1 million people. So let's take a look at Virginia Beach, Virginia, with a metro population including Norfolk and Newport News of about 1.7 million residents. Come on, US, we can do this. Gotta have someplace less dangerous than even those cities that most Americans would probably consider dangerous based on nothing more than the narrative they've convinced themselves of. Virginia Beach, will you help us realign our perspectives on the dangers of living in the US? I hope so, because honestly, it's getting a bit ridiculous. All right, so let's see. Virginia Beach. In 2019, Virginia Beach had 132 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, which is 3 times under than the US national average, and even quite a bit lower than Virginia State's state average, which is quite low among states overall. There were a total of 30 murders in Virginia Beach, which is 7 per 100,000, considering that the population here is 450,000 residents in the city center. Right now I'm just talking about the city center. So that's actually a little higher than the national average, though pretty close. It's actually very low among cities of large size like this in the US. The rape, robbery, and assault rates are half or less than half of the national average, whether that's big cities or rural hamlets. So yeah, in comparison to the US, Virginia Beach, Virginia is a very safe place. Okay, now, let's see where it stands with other cities abroad. Now, even though these statistics are really more about the 450,000 living in the city center itself, and not so much the 1.7 million who live in the metro area, I'm really trying to give the US a chance here. So let's compare it not to cities of 450,000, because it would still have higher rates than most of those, but let's compare it to cities of 1.7 million. It's a little bit unfair, because the statistics I'm considering for Virginia Beach are actually closer to a 450,000 population, but I gotta give my home country some chance to not seem like the most violent place on the planet, right? I guess. Let's look at 3 cities with similar populations. The first one, Auckland, New Zealand, 1.6 million. All right, so I know New Zealand is famous for being safe, but I want a range of cities here to compare, so let's start with here, knowing full well that no US city is likely to compare to any in New Zealand in this particular topic. But that being said, Auckland is like the major metropolis in New Zealand, so maybe it's not as ideal as I'd expect it to be? Let's see. Alright, well that was quick. So upon looking, it seems as if you can basically find the background story of every single person who has been killed in Auckland, because it is so rare. Alright Auckland, I see ya, you're great, let's move on. Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, 1.6 million. So I really have no idea what to expect from the capital of Mongolia. I've never heard much about whether it's safe or unsafe as a place to live, so let's find out. So the homicide rate here is about 6 per 100,000. Virginia Beach gets close here, but still has a slightly higher rate, despite it being America's safest large city here, pitted against Mongolia's quote-unquote least safe city. I thought we had a chance here, but nope. Ulaanbaatar is safer than Virginia Beach, Virginia. Let's move on. Panama City, Panama, 1.9 million. Okay, how about you, Panama City? Okay, so if I was to compare Panama City to any of the first 4 cities up there, Panama City would be right in the middle. It's more dangerous than New York City or Los Angeles per 100,000 residents, but it's less so than Chicago or Baltimore. So when comparing it to Virginia Beach, Virginia, Panama City is statistically more dangerous. This is the first and only comparison in this whole video, I think, in which the US city is statistically less dangerous, except for maybe Moscow. But to be fair to Panama City, they had a lot of factors going against them here. I was really just looking at a 450,000 size city center in the US, comparing it to a 1.7 million metro area city in Panama. So that already gives it a bit of a disadvantage here. So in actuality, Panama City is not really that dangerous of a place to be. It's just that Virginia Beach isn't either. But Panama City is statistically more dangerous than Virginia Beach, Virginia, the safest place in the US. So thank you, Virginia Beach. Please subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos about different cities around the US and elsewhere.